Okay, should we get started? I think this is probably everyone's going to show up. So, welcome to round two of the General Education Town Hall meetings. We had a meeting on Tuesday. It was Tuesday, right?
Yes.
Okay. We had a meeting on Tuesday where we went over sort of broad overview of what is Gen Ed, what are our basic concepts and founding principles of general education. This meeting and the one on Monday is going to be geared more towards the specifics of our program, specific issues that we've identified, specific things to the way we do things. If you have any questions or want to shout out some stuff that's completely off the slides, if you just have ideas, we can do that too. But this is going to be sort of a 5 or 10 minutes, a quick overview of why we're here, and then I've got some guiding questions that will sort of moderate the discussion. But again, if at any time you want to talk about something else, yeah, just shout it out, raise your hand, that sort of thing.
As long as it's Gen Ed.
As long as it's Gen Ed, yes, exactly. Here's just the overview. As you recall, we have a general education curriculum that's been in effect since 2014. It was actually several years of work to get the current general education program in place. This particular exercise, this is a steering committee put together by the provost, made up of the General Education Committee, the Faculty Senate Committee, and a few other stakeholders from around campus. This is about improvement. This is not about replacement. Okay? This is about saying, we put something together in 2014, let's take a step back and see how it's working. And our idea is that we can build on what we did in the 2014, with the 2014 curriculum. And these meetings, talking to people, getting feedback is just the first step. This is us gathering data so that over the summer, we can start looking at what do the faculty want, what do the students want, what do the advisors want, and we can come in the fall with a proposal for updates, changes, updates, alterations to the current curriculum. But again, this is about improving, building upon what we have, not replacing it or rebuilding it or starting over from scratch. I put the charge to the committee on this handout for you, and basically, we're supposed to open up dialogue around campus, talking about general education. We are tasked with creating clear policies for general education certification. Anyone who's been on the general education committee in the past or has put forward a course for general education certification or recertification, you know that it's quite the process. There's a lot that can be cleaned up there. It can be made a lot simpler, streamlined. We need to establish routine assessment, so find ways to keep this 5-year cycle of review. Is there a way we can get a better, more routine assessment cycle? We've been tasked with eliminating navigational issues in general education. These are the sorts of issues where a student changes majors and then they have to go back and retake gen eds because they took the wrong gen eds, or prereqs and co-reqs and issues like that. So there are some students that wind up sticking around for an extra semester to get a gen ed, that sort of thing. Or I was talking to a student yesterday who's frantically trying to get a gen ed, but she has to get all of her 3,000 level credits in her last year, and she needs this one gen ed, and they canceled the class. The one 3,000 level gen ed she needed, it was offered in the fall, and they canceled it, so she's freaking out. What am I going to do? So, these sorts of issues we've got to figure out. And then we've got to make sure we are in compliance with accreditation. So there's a SAC COC issue as well. As far as general observations that we've noticed about the general education program over the past 2-3 years really, we know that specific general education courses required by majors sometimes lead to setbacks for some students, especially students that change majors. So if a program requires, for example, you have to take Psych 1010, it could be your only behavioral and social science, that can cause a problem when someone transfers in with a poli-sci or something to that effect. So those sorts of issues show up. Co-ed prerequisites. The original 2013 proposal was to do away with non-gen ed pre and co-requisites for gen ed courses. However, several gen ed courses still have pre and co-requisites. So those were mostly because they were grandfathered in, and we just never went back and cleaned that up. Interpretation and assessment of learning outcomes can be very difficult. If you look through that list of outcomes that I gave you, on the handout we have the entire kind of an abbreviated general education program at UTC. And if you start reading through the outcomes, especially when you look at, say, fine arts and humanities, you have big outcomes and you have subcategory outcomes, and then there's just a lot of confusion in what we're supposed to be writing to and assessing. We've been having trouble on the committee with courses that go up for dual categories. That's not in and of itself a problem. That can benefit students because then they have, a swing class that can go a bunch of different ways. However, it makes it hard to teach a class when you are effectively doubling your outcomes. And we've been helping a lot of people try to get through the process, but it's difficult. Syllabus drift is a big issue. This is probably one of the ones that I'm concerned with the most. I had a faculty member last fall who said to me, not knowing I was the chair of gen ed, she said, thank God we got our class through gen ed, now we can go back to teaching it the way it was, which is not really good to say to the gen ed committee. But what happens is that over a course of 5 years, you have new instructors coming in, you have new textbooks, you have new theories, you have new concepts, and courses change. They deviate over 5 years. You wind up with courses that are taught completely differently. You wind up with advisors trying to tell their students, well, you've got these 7 or 8 courses, but it's different instructors. They're all taught different ways, and I don't know which one to tell you to take. So that's sort of an issue. Transfer students in many cases have it easier. So a student who transfers in from a TBR school or transfers in with an associate's, doesn't matter what gen eds they took, we are going to accept that they fulfill their gen ed curriculum. Even if they're taking courses that we don't count for gen ed, so like anatomy and physiology, for example, you can transfer that in as gen ed, no problem. But our students can't take it for gen ed. So transfer students a lot of times have an easier go of it. And then as the advisors told us about a month ago, general education is not general as far as that was their consensus. They didn't think it was general enough. So what that means, I'll leave to you to interpret. As far as data, we have no conclusive data that says anything. We have nothing that says there's this huge systemic problem with gen ed. So we're still gathering data. We have broad averages. For example, we know that, and don't worry about all these numbers, but we know that the total gen ed average is 53 hours. So out of a 41 credit hour curriculum, the average student takes 53.4 gen eds. We don't know if they're actually using those gen eds or they're just incidental gen ed classes because they took an elective that happens to be gen ed. We don't know that. We have to figure that out. We know the average student graduates with 131.9 credit hours. Obviously, the way math works, you can't go below 120. And some programs are at 128, so really it's, they're graduating a few classes over. So is gen ed contributing to that? We have no data that says so. We have no data that says it isn't. We're trying to figure these things out. We were given this chart, which is kind of interesting, that 80% of all gen ed credits are taken within the top 20% of classes. It's called the Pareto distribution. It's standard. You can't get rid of it. That's just the way everything works. The entire course catalog looks like this. But it is interesting because we have 178 general education courses, some of which haven't been taught in years. Some of which was it 3-4 years old, or more. So it makes it hard to advise students when you've got all these attributes and you've got all these sorts of things going on and you don't know, well, which classes are actually taught, which one's going to be dropped, those sorts of things. So we were given this number, or this chart, but basically our position is that general education is working, as far as we can tell, but can we make it work better? That's what we want to do. And I've got a series of 5 questions that will sort of guide a discussion about the nuts and bolts of what we're doing. And I'll kind of give each question about 10 minutes. But again, if you want to talk about something else, feel free. Sandy, you want to add anything?
No, you've covered it all so
Okay.
far.
All right.
Lane, I want to throw something in.
Sure thing.
And I don't necessarily disagree with
Yeah.
what you're saying, but you're saying general education is working. You gave a bunch of evidence
Yeah.
of why it's not broken. Do you have any evidence of why it is working?
Of why it is working.
Yeah. Can you support that
That's a fair assessment. Well, what I should say, and I should clarify this, we have no evidence that there's a systemic problem. We haven't been presented evidence one way or the other that it's, so as far as, should I say it's working? No, I can't, I don't have evidence to say that it is working, but we have no disconfirming evidence, if that's fair enough. So yeah, that's probably a bit of a bold statement, a bit of a biased statement. But we do know there are individual students, we have anecdotes, there are lots of individual students that have troubles with gen ed. There are lots of individual students who have trouble with a lot of things in the curriculum. So whether gen ed is a significant contributing factor to problems with graduation, we're trying to figure that out. So let's see. So how can we improve it? The very first question sort of think about is the current course certification and recertification process. We wanted to get some feedback on what the faculty think about the current process. Has everyone in here or actually tried to certify a class or recertify a class or been through the process? Most of us have. So we want to get some feedback. Is the process working for you? Or are there things we can do to improve?
In my experience, I was the head of English for a few years and associate head for 5 years, right? And so I helped Verby with the recertification and certification process, and then I was in charge of it myself. I worked directly with the director of composition, Lauren Ingram at the time, on course recertification. So in English, it's Western Humanities courses, it's literature courses, it's English composition, Comp 1, Comp 2. It was cumbersome, but in my experience, it's necessarily cumbersome. I think in recent years, we've increasingly turned our attention toward the learning outcomes, and I think that's the right path to take. But in my experience, I would just say it's cumbersome, but it's necessarily so.
My one comment is that some individuals or departments use the certification process as a turf war, as a way to protect their own department.
How do you mean?
I watched it happen in College of Arts and Sciences at the beginning of the year. History department went after a philosophy course, saying it was something about Christianity, and they were saying, well, you should start it before the birth of Christ. They were having a fight about what is history and what should the timeline be, and it was history telling philosophy what to do because history felt like they owned the category.
This was a historical understanding
Yes.
course?
Yes.
And so...
And I think they were trying to protect their category because they've lost ground in their category.
Is that something other people have seen, that there are people like to own categories, or only certain departments should teach certain categories? Is that, do you see that up? Is that the idea you're getting at?
Yes.
Is that a common feeling, or?
Whether we've seen it or not, it's not hard to imagine it happen. And so, administrators come and faculty come and go. Maybe the current people are or are not behaving in that way, but you can imagine people behaving in that way.
Yeah.
Lane, there's only one category for which there's only one department that teaches it, right?
That's right.
That's what I thought. So math is the only one. Stat is shared. Even
Rhetoric and
and composition is shared now.
Yeah,
History.
history class.
Right.
And honors.
Right. So there's only one category that is actually, quote, owned by one department. There's no reason that couldn't be broadened, but it would have to meet the learning outcomes. There's nothing preventing anybody from proposing a class outside of the math department as long as it meets the learning outcomes, right?
And I've heard that rumor, by the way.
English is getting in the math business.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, not English, but.
Actually, even in the math, even though the math department is teaching, you have other departments that knows what to teach, which is exactly what Sharon was referring to.
Right.
You have to teach this, you have to teach it this way, and so on and so
Right.
forth.
Part of that may be to the language of the categories. I was saying something about this the other day.
But see, the example I'm giving, they weren't even talking about the outcomes, because the class met the outcomes. They were talking very turf war
No,
about
I mean, just
subject.
the name of the category.
Yeah.
When it's math.
Yeah.
There's a certain expectation about who's going to be teaching those courses, and I think the same is true of historical understanding, even though that got massaged a little bit away from history. It's still, there's a certain, a certain expectation, let's say. And I think it's on the part of students as well. I think they, for a historical understanding course, for example, they think they need to take a history course, which may not necessarily always be the case, depending on what's been certified in that category. So the more the categories are tied to disciplinary subjects and departments, I think the more limiting they really are. And I'm just talking about what we call the categories. It's that simple. If we had something like quantitative reasoning, that might loosen things up and change some perceptions.
about the recertification.
Right.
What we do is we wait for 5 years, right?
Right.
And then look at it after that, another 5 years. And a lot of things go in between those 5 years. And so if it were possible to find a way in which we could be either within the department, doing assessment, right, maybe every 2 years, maybe yearly, so that by the end of 5 years, the outcome is already ready to be presented to the General Education Committee. So, in fact, probably if that is the case, and then that professor will tell you, okay, after we go back to our own ways of life, that wouldn't happen. So that could be something to think about. Could this be done maybe every 2 years within the department itself?
Right.
And then after 5 years, something presented to the General Education Committee. And if it's done that way, then it's not going to be a big problem, because what we do, I have had that experience in the math in terms of statistics. We wait after 5 years, we have to look around for documents, and it becomes very burdensome.
Does math have a gen ed committee in the department? I know some departments across arts and sciences specifically have gen ed committees within the department.
Right.
So they do that every other year, sort of review and check, kind of taking the pulse of the courses and whether they're meeting the outcomes. That's done.
Recently, we have course coordinators,
Right.
and we do empower the coordinators to make sure that anybody teaching a Gen Ed course teach to satisfy the outcomes.
Okay.
So that it seems to be working so far. So that's the only way we have to assess what's going on.
Okay.
And I believe if that's done in all departments, or every department has a committee on Gen Ed, certainly that will certainly help.
Yeah.
I've only done certification on classes at 5 years old, so I haven't done recertification, but maybe also to help with that is if there is some place, you know, digital archive where every semester those of us that are teaching the different classes have to drop things, so we don't have to run around and get the documents, because I don't even know, honestly.
We're already pulling syllabi. for
No,
syllabi.
but like class, don't we have to turn in examples of class work and
Yes.
things like that? And just like, you know, it would be a lot easier for me each semester to drop a couple of examples of student work into a digital box, and then you would have it for the whole 5 years, and you could see, did I change in the middle? Did, you know, what happened? It's much harder to go back at the end of 5 years and find that.
Absolutely.
Well, if you did improve, you could show the continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Why you
Right.
improved.
Yeah.
That might be a good thing. So ultimately, that should be what people are looking at.
Yeah.
Well, it's also good for new faculty coming in teaching a course, if they can see what has gone on before them.
Yeah. And Lane, I think this is related, in terms of certification and recertification. We've got compliance assist now, right?
Right.
So all the departments, the College of Arts and Sciences, everyone across campus is putting in plans, and then they're assessing their plans or programmatic outcomes, right?
Mhm.
There is a general education compliance assist area, and that was, and I wonder if that becomes a sort of repository for some of these documents. If that becomes the sort of archival space from one year to the next, then there's a sort of comm area within the Gen Ed compliance assist,
Or you just have one for each class, like
Folder.
every single class.
maybe.
Course, not class,
Maybe.
course.
Yeah. And admittedly, that's, in my experience with compliance assist this past year, the Gen Ed sort of area, I don't know who was in charge of that. Was that the committee or?
Yeah, we've not used it.
Yeah. I mean, it's out there.
It's
Yeah.
out there,
But linking courses to that was that was something that fell through the cracks, as they say.
I assume recertification is going to be in part based on the assessment that was performed throughout the course.
That's right.
And I just had a course recertified a year ago. To my knowledge, Now, maybe this is something I just overlooked in the process, but is there an accepted mode of assessment? In other words, is there a defined way to assess these courses?
Quantitative versus
Yeah,
qualitative.
yeah, I mean, for example, AAC&U, with their LEAP outcomes, and what they do is they establish a set of rubrics
Yeah.
that correspond to the different general education categories that then people who are teaching them could use to actually assess whether or not the students are meeting the goals of the course. In my case, you know, we've got our accreditors set learning outcomes that we have to deal with for courses within the major. We've got, you know, from looking at this, I've got the category outcomes, which are numbered which are 6. I've got the subcategory outcomes, which are another 4. So and then I've got my course outcomes. You know, so I mean, we're at 3 layers of outcomes here, all of which could be assessed for various purposes in different ways, but the burden of trying to assess that amalgamation of stuff with no accepted practice, as far as I'm aware, seems problematic on its face.
I agree. And that's one of the things that it's one of those issues with the 2014 curriculum, we didn't put in we didn't give any guidance on assessment. And so the committee has sort of been doing it ad hoc, and that's one of the things we'd like to get out of this whole process is some sort of means of continual assessment. And I have a slide up here, a question in just a second about assessment, because that's a concern we've noted. And if we could use value rubrics or something, that would be great.
Len, when you send a program across to us to evaluate for certification, we have a rubric.
Mhm. We have a rubric, but at the same time, the types of assessments that are allowed, we don't have a way of rubricing assessments themselves. We have the rubric that says, here's the outcome, tell us how your class meets it, and tell us about assessments that you use, but we don't have any guidance on proper assessment. You know, and so one section of the 2 courses, the same course, one section will use multiple choice, the other will use essays. And so what are we, you know, when we see this all the time, what are we supposed to do with that? And so we have to do it on an ad hoc, course-by-course basis, and that's, I don't like that inconsistency, or that inconsistency could be an issue.
Well, you know, and as the outcomes are written, I mean, I'll just pick one out of my subcategory. Form and defend judgments about creative modes of expression. Doesn't say they have to do it well. You know? I mean, it just says they have to form and defend them.
Right.
You know, but there's no real measure it's attached to that. I mean, and the one after that is compare ideas, issues, or themes in human civilization's achievements. What the hell am I supposed to do with that outcome?
Yeah.
I mean, that's so broad and so, you know, overarching that I don't even know where I would establish
Right.
a mode of assessment to begin with, starting from that subcategory outcome.
That's right.
Just as a thought, I mean, most things that we deal with in terms of assessment and things of that sort are lowest common denominator. In other words, when we're in the Gen Ed committee, often we're looking for evidence that indicates that any of this has been done, not necessarily judging quality per
Right.
se. Quality is a totally different issue in some sense.
Right.
In some sense, we're saying the lowest common denominator. Are you actually doing this at all? And
Right.
sometimes there's no evidence whatsoever that they're doing what they think that they're doing.
Let's see, just keep us on track. Let's see what the next slide asks.
Well,
We'll have a chance to come
Take
back
the
to
next slide
this.
for $200.
Hey, Lane, I just wanted to ask if Chad thought some of the outcomes should be revised.
Well, I mean, I certainly think that last one that I mentioned is so overbroad. You know, when you're talking about all of civilization's themes and achievements, you know, now, maybe the breadth is good. You know, maybe it allows us, if we're just going for a yes, I did that, or no, I didn't, kind of response, and can I attach it to it? Sure. You know, but then again, I'm not exactly sure which themes or achievements, or if there is an idea underpinning that, because we're just reading it flat on the paper as it stands. So, you know, that might be helpful. I mean, and if you had the corresponding, you know, set of rubrics for assessment, it might clarify some of these other things, but in absence of those.
And it could be the case that would training, sort of like yearly sort of training for courses going through the process. Hey, here's what you're going to need to do, and that
I went through the certification process,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say that I had any guidance
Yeah,
in terms
exactly.
of what I was gonna do once it was certified.
Right.
So it's certified now, and I've got recertification in 5 years, but,
Yeah.
you know, what am I doing right now to gather that information? Not much, because no one's asked me to do it.
Right. And the current committee is a volunteer faculty senate committee, and I don't
Right.
think there's the time to actually go through and guide every single person without getting a full year's release or something.
Right.
Oh, I don't know, that's not here. The issue of consistency comes up a lot when you have, especially with courses, we're sort of hinted at it with, over the course of 5 years, a course may change. What do we do about that? Is that okay? And then there's also the issue when you have multiple sections taught on the same course. Consider English 1010 or English 1020, where you will have 80 to 100 sections every year, or every semester, excuse me, and keeping all of those, you know, in line with one another is maybe a challenge. Do you see issues in consistency, or should courses be allowed to kind of do their own thing?
I think that's the responsibility of the department. If they've got multiple sections of a single course, it's their responsibility to make sure all those sections match up.
I talked to Chris Stewart and Tom Balaz about, I'm on the steering committee, and that was their assessment too, is that this needs to be, there needs to be a kind of self-policing within the department to make sure there's not this dreaded syllabus drift.
Yeah.
And, but they also suggested, or at least Chris did, I think, that maybe there needs to be, you said, as you noted, we are, you know, the Faculty Senate Gen Ed Committee is a volunteer, and it is hugely time-consuming as it is. And as much as most of us don't want to add more layers of administration, maybe there needs to be a Gen Ed czar. That's what, you know, somebody whose job it is to interact with department heads to make sure that, you know, and the department head said, here's what we did within our department, and report to someone whose sole job it is, as opposed to a bunch of people who are trying really hard to do a good job of this.
And where do you imagine that person would be?
I don't know.
In administration,
At
faculty?
administration. That's the sense I got from Chris.
Yeah.
I'm kind of repeating what he
No,
said.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying,
Uh-huh.
I think that's an important question, because I think that faculty may feel, when administration dictates to them what the curriculum should look like, that that's a point of conflict.
I don't think that, the sense that I got from Chris was not that he wanted them to dictate, but more to kind of.
Guide.
Yeah, well, monitor and guide, and just say, okay, here, you know, it's like, if there's clear rules within the department, and you can present what you have done for your Gen Ed classes to this person, and they can check off a bunch of boxes, whatever and not say, you must do this, English department, or you must do this.
Some of the health departments and instructors figure out how to do this
Yes,
best within their.
yes,
Yeah.
and someone
I
whose
think that's
only job
not
it
a bad
is.
idea.
And it's, as opposed to, again, poor Lane, you
Right.
know.
Well, I agree.
And Rebecca, yeah,
That
Rebecca
kind of
Jones.
situation where everybody agrees and is going along and rowing in the same direction is fine. But the real issue with having somebody like that is when that's not happening.
Yeah.
Because if it becomes an issue that, for example, SACS accreditation in some way is affected by a department not doing what they should be doing, then that.
Then the person is put in the position of having to go.
Yes,
Stick
right,
it to
and I'm saying that, you know, for me, when you say you want to create something, it's not, not you specifically, I'm saying, when something new is created, it's not important to ask, and if this goes well, how great will it be? It's rather to say, when this goes sideways,
Yes.
how do we
yes,
deal
I
with
get
that?
Yeah.
The other thing about consistency, and maybe I'm just stating the obvious, I mean, there are different kinds of consistency and inconsistency. If I'm teaching a general education course and I'm doing it across 5 years, I myself, I don't know about it, I myself expect that course to change over the course of 5 years. Things aren't working, I need to find ways to make them work, those sorts of things. Assignments just are a bust, I need to change that assignment, et cetera. So I would hope that across 5 years, change is positive change and improvement. Or at least that would be my effort. The other kind of inconsistencies that we're talking about is inconsistency across sections and therefore across instructors. Joe and I are not going to teach the same course the same way, probably. I mean, we'll have a lot in common. We have a lot of things that are kind of common practice for us, but it's not going to be the same course because I won't have students necessarily in an intro to lit course, for example, read the same things Joe might assign. And it should be that way. It should be that way. I don't want to be given a common syllabus that I therefore become the talking head for. That's not what we're doing here. It's my disciplinary expertise that's where it guides the course. But that doesn't mean we can't have consistency in terms of things like, again, to choose an English course, the number of papers assigned, right? Versus number of exams or tests or whatever. You can have that kind of consistency. What those papers are, et cetera, is looser, but you can have a certain percentage of writing in a course as a guideline for a category. And then let the instructors figure out how to implement that. There are ways to make consistency without having courses just be cookie cutter, off the shelf things.
What you're suggesting, Greg, is that the one thing that does need to be consistent would be the learning outcomes.
Right, that's exactly.
Yeah, for that category.
Right.
If we're both teaching a course that satisfies the literature category, our students should be able to recognize and analyze figurative language.
Yeah.
They should be able to interpret multiple levels of meaning. They should, et cetera, et cetera. And so the pedagogy might be different.
Yeah.
The outcome would be the
Yeah,
same.
that's what the learning outcomes are for, is to
Yeah.
provide some
Yeah.
framework of consistency.
See, I can make the exact opposite argument. I can say, okay, this is a general education course. And so I've got student A and I've got student B. I've got two instructors teaching the same course, but we're reading two different things. And now I'm kind of upset because you're getting to read this, I'm having to read this. And because of the fact that it is a general education course, I can make the same argument that actually it should be consistent. That they should have be reading the same material. And, and then, the instructor's expertise in terms of where they are and, maybe should come into play more into classes above the general education level, not necessarily the general education at the general education level. That the general education classes in a lot of ways should be cookie cutter. They should be similar so that student A gets the same type of thing as student B. And that's just kind of the opposite side of the argument.
Just to follow up on that too, that was something that came out of the advisors meeting as well, that they had trouble advising students when you had a slate of these courses that, had different instructors, and they would say, well, you shouldn't take this gen ed from this instructor because they do this thing. You should take it from this one because they do this other thing. And it was just hard. So the advisors would agree, they expressed a similar sentiment. But you see those two sides.
What if two instructors, they teach differently, they have different personalities, right? Sure, they will have different personalities, but if they follow the outcomes, I believe the students are learning the same thing. If they follow the outcomes. So the consistency should be in terms of the outcomes. It's not possible for everybody to teach exactly the same way. That is not possible. So if we can make sure that everybody keeps to the outcomes, the student will learn the same thing but in different ways, and that should be okay.
How do the advisors decide which section they tell their students to take? Based on what they would want to take?
Well,
Based
let me
on
come
rumor?
with that.
No, I'm just saying, based on other student rumors, I like.
All right, in math, I can say that. And let me answer that question with respect to math. If you are what they will call a difficult teacher, meaning that many students
Hard, yeah.
then they will say, don't take a course from that. Some of them will even tell the student, go to Chattanooga State to take the course. So to some extent, some of the advisors actually are not advising the students in the best interest of the student, because looking at whether a student passes, and that means that the teacher is not a good teacher, I don't think that's correct. And so we have to be careful when we hear from these advisors. This instructor is not good. Ask them the criteria from that. Most of the time, again, in math, I don't know other areas, it would be because, many students are failing in your class. But they forget maybe you are very demanding, which in essence will make the student a better student, especially when the student goes to the other classes.
I think there needs to be some more consistency between the reading, like what you're reading across, yes, text, because that can be more than reading. The consistency among the text used in the same course, multiple sections, and in the assessments. And if a department, like English, where you have 80 sections of something, if you want more variety, then make more courses, right? There could be a version of the course that uses all vampire literature, and then a version of the course, but make different courses. That's where, I think we're still stuck in the old days of gen ed, and you've seen it happen in historical understandings. It's definitely happened there. In the old days, there were 3 history classes, and you took those 3 history classes, and you were going to get that 3 World Civ 1, 2, and 3. And now you see this wide variety of historical understandings classes in a wide variety of departments, and then students can pick, I want to do history of this kind of stuff, or I want to do history of that kind of stuff. And then it's in the course. But within a course, I think there needs to be some kind of consistency. I mean, we teach in our department, we have media writing. It's not a gen ed class, it's a required class for all our majors. And they have a consistent syllabus. They have to use the same textbook. They have to use very similar assessments. There's variety in what the professors do for the assignment. They might change up what the news story is that they're writing. They're all going to be writing news stories. So there's room for some variety, but they're all getting the same textbook. They're all getting similar. They're all doing news quizzes. So there's not this, I'm going to pick this professor because she doesn't do news quizzes, or I'm going to pick that one because they only make us write 5 news stories and the other one makes us write 10 news stories. No, there's consistency across the basic elements of the course.
Math has a policy that if we teach multiple sections of something, then they all use the same textbook.
Yeah.
So
I don't think English has that.
English 1010 and 1020 have consistent assignments, so they all have to do synthesis essays and rhetorical analysis. The assignments are all standardized, and English 1020 has a standardized annotated bibliography research paper, 10 to 12 sources, and this many pages and words and that kind of stuff. But they get to choose their own topics or write to whatever text they want. But the assessments are all standardized.
Well, one of the advantages to what Charlene just suggested is that if there were different courses with different names, it would signpost to the students what they're enrolling in and whether or not, because you want the students to have an interest in the course. And so let's say you had a vampire literature, zombie literature, a Jane Austen, whatever it might be, and you had the different levels of those courses. And that would signpost to the students, which could be advantageous. The drawback goes back to the previous slide, which is if you have to go through certification for every one of these courses, I can tell you I don't think you're going to find many departments and faculty that are going to go, I want to go through gen ed certification again for a different course. I mean, for example, in our department, you teach media history.
Right. We only have three classes that go through gen ed.
Right, yeah, but the fact of the matter is that you may teach media history about one medium or, a set of medium. You may do it in one way. If I were to pick up that class, my area is electronic media. I might focus on radio and television. It'd be cool if we could just blanket the radio history class going through the certification, but then create variations that we had different course titles in the system. Colon, yeah, whatever it might be, where you didn't have to do the certification for every single. So I completely agree with where Charlene's coming from, but I think we have to go back and look at how you certify that as well.
We're seeing a little bit more of that, particularly the English department put through literature courses last year that are repeatable. so that they can identify the subject of that particular section. Of course, we've also been grappling with how to certify and recertify these repeatable courses and to monitor them to make sure that each of the variations are meeting the expectations and outcomes.
Yeah, to me, that should be departmental.
Yeah.
You know, that the department should make sure that you're adhering to the general education guidelines.
I'm going to click a slide here just to keep us on task and make sure we get to everything. One of the issues that we look at is the original 2014 curriculum was supposed to do away with pre and co-requisites, or at least non-gen ed pre and
I thought you
co-requisites.
guys dropped that.
Well,
That was that was an intent, and then they didn't do it.
yeah, it's.
It was not
is that how it worked?
mandated.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
not mandated.
That is how.
That was the hope.
That
But-
was, yeah, was the way.
And going through, there are, there's one thing where you have courses that require English 1010 as a pre or co-rec. It's very, very common, or a particular math class. But there are courses out there that require, say, senior status, or you must be in the major, or a non-general education prerequisite. Your thoughts on this idea of Cohen prerequisites?
Well, the problem in math is very specific to math. We don't want our majors to take a statistics course that's like Math 2100. It's of no use to them. And so the statistics course that they would normally take would be Math 3100 or Math 4130 and 4140, whichever one of those it is that count. I can never remember which. Well, those courses necessarily, because they're in the major, have calculus as a prerequisite, and in particular calculus 2 is a minimum, which is not Gen Ed. It just isn't. So I don't, it's difficult for me to understand how to deal with that if you're going to say that, for example, 3100 or 4140, I think is the one, satisfy Gen Ed. The other option I've heard is to simply say that your Gen Ed is marked as complete, for example, if in that category, if you take that course, which is different to me somehow than certifying it. And we have something like that. If you have a 28 in mathematics, a 28 subscore in the math part of the ACT, your math Gen Ed is marked complete. And so an alternative to something like that in a major, again, maybe this only comes up in math, but an alternative to that would be to say that the Gen Ed is marked complete if you take this course, instead of saying that that the course itself is Gen Ed. I'd be happy with that.
Would you still have to have the 41 hours, though, beyond you could eliminate like a 3-hour?
We wouldn't make them go back and take it. It's just that they have the same
Okay.
ACT subscore placement in English,
Yeah.
but we don't make them go back and take
it
another
again.
course.
Yeah.
Right.
And this goes back to, okay, I'm showing my age here, 1998 and earlier, when we had certain types of Gen Ed placement for math particularly. If you had a certain ACT subscore, your requirement was waived. You didn't have to take something else or take additional hours. It was totally waived.
Okay, the problem we have in math is not only with respect to the Gen Ed. We require math students to, when they come in, they take, the only stats called there is 3100, and then from there 4130, 4140, and so on and so forth. I teach 3100 from time to time, and others. And the problem that we have is that some of these students have not even seen statistics before, and they have problems completing the course. And so what we are trying to do now within the department is to have some variation in the Gen Ed statistics. The current 2100, and then create another Gen Ed that could be taken by math and maybe other science students that does not require any prerequisite. If we do that, then what happens is that our students now can then move on to 3100 without having difficulties, because right now, most of them have difficulties.
But that's a major course, that's not it's a program course,
right,
it's not a Gen Ed course.
Right, the 3100 shouldn't be. because, again, because of the requirement, the textbook that you choose cannot have all those type of things that we need for Gen Ed education. So we don't teach it to 100 to certify in Gen Ed. I teach it, if I say it does certify, I'm lying, but it does not. So I think what the movement in the department now is find a way to come up with a course that math majors, those in the sciences, engineering, computer science, could also choose. And recently, there was, I got an email from a lady, Lucas, got an email from a lady and then forwarded it to me. She wanted to know if we do analysis of variance in the 2100. And we don't. And so one of the things we want to do, if we create two variations, then the one that could be taken by math students and the sciences could have more topics and covered in depth than the current 2100. So that the department, I believe, was physical therapy or something like that. So they can pick and choose depending. So we have two courses in statistics that could meet the Gen Ed, and department advisors can pick and choose which one they want the student to go in. So that is the movement now.
I have seen that at other institutions in their catalogs where they'll have quantitative courses for science majors and for math majors versus those for humanities majors.
Right.
Same in natural sciences. I've seen that there too.
Well, we kind of have that with 1010 versus 1130. I think it's changing our perceptions of Gen Ed classes with prereqs. I always hear the complaint that Gen Ed classes with prereqs are slowing down students completing their degree. I don't see it that way. So in communication, we have a required class 3200 Mass Comm Perspectives. It's in the major requirements. It also happens to be a Gen Ed class that meets behavioral and social sciences requirement. Now, 3200 has a prereq of 1010, which is a major required class. So for majors, they take 1010, then they take 3200. When they're taking 3200, it helps satisfy a Gen Ed behavioral social science class. So for them, it's doing double duty. It's helping them that their major required class is in behavioral and social science. Now, if they happen to transfer in and they have other behavioral social sciences and they took up 2 other, that's fine. We don't say you took the wrong Gen Ed, that's fine. You're still gonna take 3200 because it's program requirement. And so they just get more behavioral social science. But for those students that come in as a comm major and are advised correctly, they save themselves a class. So I think the idea that every Gen Ed class has to be open to every single student isn't actually helping them. So if you make it that every math class has no prereq so that anybody can take it, then you've got math students having to take some easy math they don't care about that's below their standard for Gen Ed, and then they have to take their major required class. You gotta take 1130, and then you'll go take the real math for math people. Why don't you just let the real math for math people count as the Gen Ed? That's why you end up with classes. Prereqs and co-reqs, and I don't think that's harming students. It's helping them, allowing them to take major requirements and count them for Gen Ed.
Yeah, sometimes what does harm, though, is when you get a student, like I've got a student I advised this semester, I'll use an anecdotal example, who transferred or changed majors, came to comm from biology. All right, she's got a number of fall-through courses that were higher level than the Gen Ed requirement for natural sciences. And she's having to go back to pick up this additional natural science class, you know, because she's not satisfied with the Gen Ed requirement, even though she's got more science than almost.
But that's not because she transferred. It wouldn't have counted as Gen Ed in her old major. She just hadn't bothered to take her Gen Ed science class yet. That's the
Right.
truth.
Yeah, and the only point I'm adding, though, is that if we're going to expand it out to other things within the major, then why don't we look at it across the board and go, you know, hey, if the idea behind general education is that a student gets exposure to an area, then it becomes very difficult from an advisor standpoint. It becomes very difficult from an advisor standpoint to explain why it is that this lower level class counted And this upper level
But
class
Chad,
did
I
not
don't,
count.
it's not, gen ed is not to get exposure. If that was true, it'd say, take any biology class,
Right.
take any math class. It's to hit these certain learning outcomes. But there are classes that can hit the learning outcomes of gen ed and do something for a major, like 3200, where there's a prereq on it. And so if you're not a comm major, don't take 3200. Like, that's okay.
Another-
They take psychology 1010 instead.
Just looking at the time, if we can kind of build on this a little bit, the idea of within majors, sort of tied to this idea of pre and co-requisites, is the idea that certain programs require specific general education
That's a
courses.
little different, Chad.
Okay, so,
It's interesting, in the two different scenarios we just heard, in mathematics and comm, the same could be true in English, so I'll use English as an example. We were talking about 3,000 level courses, upper division courses that have gen ed courses with prereq. I can't imagine Shakespeare, for example, in English, I think it's 3880. Satisfies the literature category. I think in the past it satisfied a different category,
Not anymore.
but pre-2014. But can you imagine a student not
A
having
freshman walking into
had,
Shakespeare
they might.
but
Well, not
with no classes, yeah.
But once they get past 30 hours,
Right.
is it 30 hours? Then they can take that upper division course, but what if they haven't had Comp 2? I mean,
Right.
do you want a
Right.
student who doesn't have a solid writing
Right.
background, or they haven't had our Comp sequence, enrolling in a 3,000 level difficult
Heavy
Shakespeare
writing.
course, right? So
Heavy writing.
there's a benefit there, perhaps, and I just want to point out that both of those examples had to do with upper division courses having a prereq. So part of that issue is having upper division courses in gen ed.
But see, but
right?
having
it
upper
does-
division does allow people to take a major required class
Right.
that then helps them with gen ed. I'm not a fan of you're hiding major required classes in gen ed. I know that's a separate issue. There are departments that instead of putting a class in their major requirements, they put it in the gen ed saying, well, because you happen to be this major, this is the gen ed class you have to take.
Right.
They should just list it as a major requirement, so,
Yeah.
like,
Well,
we make them
it
take
is a
it.
major requirement. What's happened is, in order to hopefully better advise students, if it's a major required course, and it's going to, and they need it to satisfy their
It'll say,
gen
"Take
ed
this."
and meet 120 and not go over, it's listed in the catalog in the general education section to hopefully advise the students in that
Right,
way.
right.
You know, we don't want them to take 130 hours because this is
Right.
up there. And that-
Then, and maybe then it's explained to advisors, you don't say you took the wrong gen ed, you say you still need this major requirement.
Okay, Karen.
Actually, Will-
Can we just put it on tape so we push the button?
Yeah.
Will, you had
Yeah, I had a point over here. The thing came up earlier about the purpose of gen ed is not exposure. Well, what is the purpose of gen ed if it's not exposure?
But it's more than exposure, it's also to get to these learning outcomes. It's not like I just.
Fundamentally, we need to examine what the purpose of gen ed is and make sure that those outcomes are being satisfied by the students. You know, if it's just an assortment of courses, that's a whole thing that we're trying to avoid in some sense. It's not just a menu, and how do you get through it the easiest? How do you have the greatest benefit to the student? How do you let them grow the most they can grow in their college experience? And, you know, in some sense, we get so much down in the details, we lose that picture. And I want to make sure we don't do that.
I appreciate the fact that Chad brought up the liberal education, America's Promise outcomes, the LEAP,
Yeah.
essential learning outcomes.
A lot of that
because
has that in it.
I mean, the general education or core curriculum, whatever you call it, right? The whole idea is that you're providing for students a liberal arts and sciences and
Right.
mathematics education, right? And this is a 4-year institution.
Right.
We're not a technical school.
Right.
We do have professional and pre-professional programs, but ultimately, we are providing a 4-year university-level education that has as a foundation.
Right.
You can call it exposure,
But
but
see-
what we're getting at is a liberally educated,
So it's,
arts and sciences educated mind.
right. And so a number of courses doesn't necessarily satisfy that. You know, the outcomes satisfy that.
Right,
Yes.
right. So the benefit to allowing programs to require specific general education courses. I wonder, do we have data, you mentioned data earlier, for how many students, we've got the 131 hours, that's the average, right?
Yeah.
For degree
about
completion.
132, yeah.
When we've got some professional and pre-professional programs that require 128, that may be an indicator of success. I don't know, but I mean, to me, it seems like we may be facilitating degree completion by permitting some of those general education courses to be in the degree
compliance.
Requirements. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Did you do the same
we're expediting.
thing
Of course, the
before?
trade-off is if you have a student change majors, and this is where Karen hits the taper,
And
hits
getting back to
play on
that
the taper.
study,
board.
getting back to that study, there's a lot of that where it talks about how can you make this a method that becomes more transparent and easier for the students to digest to make sure that they get the most benefit.
Yeah.
Well, given the nature of Banner and the nature of all the sorts of data that's out there, we don't currently have, I mean, there is data, but we haven't been able to go through student by student.
See who is really
Do
benefiting
you
from
know
this.
how many programs require specific general education?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
All of them?
No. No, not all.
Okay, good.
I've sent you my spreadsheet.
I know.
Yeah, we do have a spreadsheet of all the courses, all the programs.
I keep one on
required.
every catalog.
Is it
for
fair to
every
say that,
program.
my guess is that most of those would be in the professional and
You are
pre-professional programs?
correct. They are professional programs for the most part.
Right. So if you transfer into a professional program, which is very common.
Right.
So you get the English major transferring into business, and they've got political science, and they've got anthropology.
Econ.
They're gonna have to retake for Psych 1010 and Econ 1010 or 1020.
Right.
That's two classes they have to add.
Yeah.
So,
Program requirements.
program requirements.
Right, Econ 10, 1020 are program requirements.
Yeah.
Prereqs on program requirements. It's not that they're redoing their gen ed, it's
Yeah.
that they need a program requirement.
Right. So,
Different breadth.
yeah, specific bread. Right. I'm just looking at the time, and this has been some great conversation.
This is,
This is probably way too much to discuss, unless you want to stick around, but, because it is 10 o'clock. But the last question we were going to get to was looking at the individual outcomes, if you felt, and we've been talking a little bit about the outcomes, how there are some issues in understanding them. What is the purpose of outcomes? This idea of exposure versus outcomes versus skills, it's all wrapped up there. So I think we've kind of been circling around this issue.
We're 3 years into the new gen ed. It's a great time to review the outcomes. I mean, it just makes sense. This would be something we need to be doing right now.
Well, like I said, we've been talking about this. Are there other thoughts, or things that you'd like to contribute to the record?
I'll suggest that maybe years back when we rolled out the clear paths, perhaps our conversations weren't as robust as they ought to have been then about how how departments and programs are situating the general education curriculum inside their clear paths, right? So, I mean, when I was the head of English when we were rolling out the clear path in creative writing, for example.
Right.
And our creative writing faculty deliberately sprinkled general education required courses throughout 8 semesters or 4 years of.
and we see that a lot.
Yeah, they didn't pack it all into the first 3 semesters, right? So they were deliberately having conversations about how to situate gen ed within a course of study that spans 4 years, not 2.5, not 3 semesters or a year and a half or 2 years. And so I don't mean to pull at the threads on the sweater here, but maybe a conversation about clear paths would be productive too.
But the clear paths are very department-oriented, the departments manage those. But yeah, guidelines even for developing the clear paths for our students might be helpful if we want them to have this general education foundation.
It is the case, we have to remember that many of the professional studies programs, students from semester 1, to get the sequencing, they have to start with an engineer or an education major, pre-nursing. They've got to go through this process, and so in many cases, you cannot put 41 credits into the first 4 semesters.
Right.
Just to get the program requirements.
Right.
But that's not always the
do-
case, and we're
That's not
still
good.
seeing them spread out.
I do feel sorry for the students today, because they can't screw up. They have to know when they hit that first semester what they want to major in, and probably better not change, and that's the only way they can really get out with 100, and never have a bad semester, like that would never happen.
Never
Always
apply for
have a
academic
course when they need a
forgiveness.
course. I mean, they're like, all of the stars have to be aligned, and you know that doesn't happen. You know, when they change majors, they need to be able to change majors.
Lane, do you all know, or has the committee looked at how many hours are required of, say, either our peer institutions or aspirational peers?
Yes, I've started pulling that together. One of the funny things, I've gone through aspirational peers, and one of the interesting things is that everyone does it differently.
Okay.
And you can look at our general education page, and it can be hard to suss out exactly what's going on. So trying to almost rubric everything is a massive challenge. I can say, looking at our aspirational peers, except if you take out the 2 schools in Florida, which have a legislative mandate to 36 credit hours, so I move the legislative mandate out of it. Accepting those cases, the average number of gen ed is, I think, is 41 point something, 42. It was right around 41, 42.
Okay.
There are programs that have as many as 46 credits of gen ed.
Yeah.
There are a few that are coming in at 39, 40, but 41 seems to be about standard. There's a wide variety of methods to allow students opportunities to, I mean, we have where you can place out and get the credit, where you can take competency exams. There's core curriculums where you've got Gen Ed 1010, Gen Ed 1020, Gen Ed, I mean, so many different variations that would require a complete, blow up of our program to even get some of their, their ideas in. But
Do we have any Tennessee requirements?
Tennessee requirements, Sandy?
We don't have any specific requirements for the four-year institutions in Tennessee, except that when a student comes from a TBR community college and they've completed their 41 hours, we will transfer and accept those 41 hours as gen ed. That's the only
If they
thing
have
that is.
an A test, if they don't.
If they what? No, we will take them no matter what.
Whether they have.
They did?
If they've taken the courses, we're going to transfer them whether they have an associate's degree or not. The associate's degree is just a blanket, you're done. If you transfer without the associate's degree, those courses will go into their respective categories.
We do have, for accreditation, there is a certain floor that we have to hit. That is 30 credits of gen ed across 3 categories. And those categories are basically a quantitative, humanities, and fine arts, and, was it writing?
Sciences or something?
No, the writing's not in it.
Yeah,
They
right.
consider writing a skills class.
Yeah, that's right. It's the
Natural
sciences.
sciences. Natural sciences is paired with math, though.
That's right.
So
Natural sciences
behavioral and
is-
social
Behavioral
sciences.
and
Behavioral social sciences and humanities. and
But it's
fine
3
arts.
categories. Most universities have many more than 3. They carve it up many different ways.
Yeah.
So our aspirational peers, that's what we've looked at. And again, it's such a mess trying to get all the data to make sense. And I'll have a course release to do that.
Thanks for the work.
Over the summer, we hope to get something, some sort of nice graphic rubric way of looking at what our aspirational peers do. But,
We don't have any Tennessee guidelines yet.
yet.
They dropped this down to 120. We were 132 at the time, they dropped us to 120.
Right.
They're telling us we have to accept the TBRs, gen ed, so we don't have any yet. Let enough people complain.
Well, that's the idea of a review of general education, part of it anyway. To be proactive, to do what we can to avoid the legislatures coming in and telling us what we have to do.
Have we, I've never seen how we handle the TBR. I mean, so there are 41. They're the ones that we have to accept.
Yeah, 41.
Well-
And are they similar categories and kind of similar?
They have a
similar-ish?
15-hour humanities and fine arts category that sort of, but doesn't really align with ours, but we will accept them all in our.
Their gen ed was mandated at 41 credit hour. That was a legislative mandate in 2006. In 2010, with the Complete College Act, we were forced to accept everything, and the simplest way to do that is to mirror a 41 credit hour gen ed. There was no legislative mandate that we had to have 41 credit hours in these specific categories. That was just the easiest way to assist students in transferring articulation.
And we had already we're at 41 when that.
We were already there, yeah, so it was like, why change anything? Let's just make it simpler to transfer. But, you're right, there could be a legislative mandate coming, because that's what happened in Florida. Other thoughts?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. We've got a lot to think about. We'll be meeting again on Monday to gather more stuff to think about. And, if you want to stick
Can I
around.
ask you a question
Yeah,
that's
sure.
not gen ed?